reign of terror only continued. In 1995, Ricky was working a B&E when he was apprehended and placed in front of a parole board. The man had a plethora of chances, only to yet again be caught in the cycle of crime that fed his record. The resounding question the board had, to an understandable degree, was simply why? Ricky had an answer for this, though, and he played the board like a violin. He said to them, "Some guy hired me to kill his wife and 3 other people while I was in jail." He controlled the narrative by painting himself as heroic, a victimized soul who wouldn't dare kill the people in question. "I wasn't planning on killing no one," he stated, seemingly in earnest to the board meeting with that day. He claimed that this agreement was put upon, and that he'd planned to end the scheme the whole time, even telling the board that when he left Erie County, he alerted Desiree to the danger, saying something to the effect, "Look, you know this guy bailed me out of jail. He put a hit on you." Upon hearing this, the parole board changed their tune, and soon the FBI put him to work as an informant on Telstar, even allowing him to act as the star witness in the proceedings to follow. Ricky's convincing pleas for help also mentioned that, because of his refusal to actually execute the plan, he was living in fear in the prison where he was now being held. He claimed that he survived a botched shanking attributed to Telstar, though allegations couldn't be proven. It wasn't a far-fetched consideration, though. Telstar had not been shy about his wealth, and he had made a spectacle of himself in prison during his time there. That makes it seem almost likely that he simply hired more than one killer. Desiree, too, found it easy to believe, and when she was questioned, her thoughts came back to the Minnesota-born man's proclivity for both keeping guns in the house and for threatening her life, particularly if she tried to leave him. Desiree, almost 60 at the time, no doubt feared for her life from Telstar long before he put out a hit on her. The lengths to which Telstar went, though, were thoroughly documented, from his normal embezzlement to the involvement of his coke dealer, who later ordered his own relatives to cart around the money Telstar had squirreled away in Genevan bank accounts. The dealer and his relatives each did hard time for their involvement, and Telstar himself, who pled guilty, only received 5 years when Ricky helped to put him away. Eventually, Telstar found a new life, a new wife, and blotted some ink on his resume to glaze over his absence from the workforce. Ricky, though, had more of his life to give to the state, all due to the events of a cold winter in 1997. A businessman named William Rickerson had hired Ricky some time before now. But come winter, William had told Ricky his employment was terminated, thanks to his acts of thievery and other activities on the clock. Ricky was now jobless, and he became somewhat obsessed, obviously experiencing anger to a vast degree, but also another emotion, greed. He'd convinced himself that his former boss was sitting on a large sum of cash, and he eventually coerced or convinced an accomplice, 21-year-old Lee Bates, to get in on the action. Coercion wasn't out of the question there, as another one of Ricky's exes, Johanna Capretto, compared the two men. Ricky would dominate, as she put it, while she described Lee as pretty much a follower. Detectives later agreed with this assessment. However, to whatever degree, Lee still became a part of the operation, which was meant to be a simple robbery. However, when William had nothing to offer initially, it became clear to Ricky that more extreme pressures would be needed in order to get what he wanted. The duo cracked open Lee's car trunk and stuffed a gagged and bound William in there. Donning only his pajamas, from North Tonawanda all the way to Ohio and back they drove, and periodically they would stop so that Ricky could attempt to beat the information out of him. Ricky was so sure that the money was there, and William could only offer up groans of pain in response. And at one point, Ricky decided to pull back William's fingers to break them. Then Ricky took William's life by snapping his neck with his own 2 hands. If Lee wasn't scared into submission before, that definitely would cement the sentiment for him now. But Ricky's murder went under the radar for a time. For days, William was considered missing, but when police checked his home, they found only some blood, but no body. That kind of distinction was odd for them, but they gathered what little evidence they could. They could make no real moves before a fisherman found pieces of a dead human body running ashore. The pieces, as was later determined, belonged to William. Weeks passed, and soon Ricky was on the doorstep of his stepbrother, Wayne Schimpf. Wade admitted to finding his appearance upsetting, undoubtedly, at least in some part, due to the look of a murderer in a face that, as many have noted, is the spitting image of his own. Nevertheless, he talked Ricky through his actions, the murder he just committed. Apparently, he'd taken William's body to Tonawanda Island with Lee, and later he returned on his own to cut up the body and dump it into the river. Wayne couldn't believe the story, and he had questions. Quote, "Are you for real? How'd you do it?" End quote. He asked whether Ricky used a chainsaw to commit the act, to which Ricky grinned hauntingly with his reply, "A hacksaw." But Ricky hadn't just shown up to swap stories. He was in trouble. He told Wayne, and if his fate depended on him, he asked to borrow his car after all. He needed to get out of town. Way out. Wayne refused, at first, only for Ricky to respond with another doomed statement. Quote, "You're my brother, you're my blood. I love you, but I'll kill you." End quote. With that, Wayne knew he was telling the truth about the dangerous act, and that it wasn't going to be the last time. If he saw it as his only way out, so Wayne made copies of his car key, and Ricky was on his way south, to Texas, where he crossed the Rio Grande using Wayne's identity and car. A fact that didn't raise any eyebrows, since they looked so much alike. So there he lived in Mexico for a time afterward, and just around this time the investigation into the death of William had begun to pin Ricky, as he predicted, as most likely to be the culprit. However, despite being far removed from the New York Justice Department and their investigation, Ricky's vacation didn't last long, as he found himself causing trouble south of the border. During a robbery he attempted outside a strip club, Ricky was once again brandishing weapons, this time killing an American man in a whole other country. He wasn't tried by the Mexican justice system, but he was held for his crime, serving his time in prison there. But he was, in a word, unwanted. Ricky tried to even escape the Mexican prison, and he made it all the way up to the roof before he was shot in the shoulder and apprehended once more. This was yet another scar, though, that he proudly carried and showed to his son, Nick, on at least one occasion, leaving Nick with a firm but frightening impression given all of his scars and run-ins with the law. Ricky had indeed proven such a difficult prisoner for the Mexican government that in 2007, they sent him alongside a cartel kingpin who'd been extradited for his crimes against the U.S. In Texas, the two criminals deplaned, and the officials were floored, as they'd received no communication regarding Ricky's arrival. They suddenly had one more dangerous man on their hands, and soon, Ricky was back up in New York, and in a 2008 testimony, Lee shared his account of the events that happened a decade ago to William Rickerson. Ricky, dressed in a stun belt and stylish suit donated by a friend, even shocked his own lawyer with the charisma he carried. And as a result of his physical strength and cunning, the courts used the stun belt and other changes to ensure that he could not escape. They removed the glass covering from the courtroom in case it could be used as a weapon, and ordered double the usual number of guards presiding over the affairs. There was even a trained marksman, a sniper, watching over the courthouse as a final measure, proving the state really aimed to take every precaution in Ricky's case. He could not, in so many words, be overestimated. Still, with all of this in place, there was a trial to be had, and when Lee had the floor, his words bought him a lesser sentence in exchange for a clarity in regard to Ricky's role in the murder. Thanks to this moving account, the 4 weeks total of testimony, and the evidence found in pieces that remained of William, a jury wasted no time in making their decision. In the state's favor, the jury agreed on a verdict only a few hours into the trial, and the judge confirmed that her own sentence to the effect was, frankly, not a difficult decision. Ricky, thanks to his egregious acts, had earned himself 25 years to life, the maximum sentence for his crime of murder in the second degree. In the hopes of putting his life of crime to an end, Ricky was eventually transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Dannemora, New York.
Devil We Know is sponsored by Podcorn, the amazing marketplace designed to help podcasters of all sizes get sponsored the way they want. I've been using Podcorn for a couple weeks now. It's real easy. You just log on, scroll through the many advertisers, send them a message why your podcast would be great to advertise on, and then you're off to the races. Creative control and transparency are the name of the game. Podcorn believes in leaving power in the hands of the creatives, and with their vast marketplace of sponsors with different needs, it's easy for any podcaster to find the deal that works best for them. Start with Podcorn now by following the link in our show notes and find a sponsor today. Just go to podcorn.com to get started.
But Ricky Matt wasn't a lone agent of chaos in the state of New York. Another man, David Sweat, did much to earn his eventual place in prison as well. David, who was born in Deposit, New York, in June of 1980, depended on a single mother, Pam, and his sisters for a modicum of early family life. But it was, according to sources, an undisciplined home. Pam didn't really keep herself in check. For one, with a chaotic home life that included numerous boyfriends, several live-in guests, and a whole lot of drinking and weed. David and his sister Tilly enjoyed very little emotional attention from their mother during this time, who'd much rather spend it with Carl Butts, one of the boyfriends that was most consistently present during the tumultuous time. Though it was clear from accounts of the bygone live-in guests that Pam was not good with David, who was believed to be a good kid, with a temper tantrum from time to time, sure, but not considered anything serious. Given that he had a right to lash out in the eyes of those who saw Pam's neglect. Carl picked up on this too. And one more telling sign of David's corruption came when Carl tried to make up for the mistakes of his girlfriend. He offered David gifts, toys to be exact, on several occasions, but David's reception was violent each time, in that he'd either burn the toys or simply smash them with a hammer. Pam too recalls seeing wickedness in David from an early age, saying, quote, "He has tormented me since he was 9 years old," end quote. When she says he started playing with knives, it was true that David had developed a keen interest in collecting knives. But after a year of being bullied in school, it's said that he brought a butcher knife to the school and earned himself a suspension. His mother claims that this is where his anger began to grow, and that David even began throwing knives at her and at the furniture. He reportedly heaved a rocking chair at her too. And though he never managed to hurt her much physically, her claims to emotional and psychological pain are great. She calls them immeasurable even. To gain a better understanding of David and his home life, Pam offered information on the school he supposedly attended. However, officials that looked into it found that while David and his family supposedly lived in Binghamton, just an hour drive from Deposit, there was no evidence that David ever attended the school Pam named. In fact, there was no record of David in that school district or any of the neighboring districts, again calling her neglect into question. She claims, though, that her son was verbally abusive even at a young age, and that this had a direct negative effect on her personal health. She reportedly experienced 2 nervous breakdowns before eventually deciding that David's behavior was intolerable, whereupon she sent him down to Florida. There, David lived with his aunt and his uncle, and David himself began exhibiting symptoms of anxiety as well. As a result, his reaction to the move proved just as troublesome, if not more so, than his life back in New York. Not long after his departure, he commandeered his aunt's car, obviously without her permission, and wrecked it. David, much like Ricky, eventually found himself in a foster home with his sister, where the sister claims he regularly made runaway attempts. Back in Deposit once again, David also picked up where he left off in his escalation of crimes, beginning life now as a drug dealer. Given the erratic nature of David's actions and Pam's need to get away from him, she never learned if he attended high school. However, the School of Hard Knocks was in full swing for David as he began his stints in correctional facilities. This occurred in part from a heist he planned at age 16, which resulted in him boosting cash and computers from a local youth group home. His plan was detailed and thorough enough that even another teenage idiot, as the judge later called them, went along as an accomplice. David's thoroughness included blueprints of the group home to reference and a plan to tie up and lock up the lady working there that night to steal the goods as they went. Despite all the planning, though, the two were eventually seen in their ski masks and caught. When forced to discuss the crime at length, David chose to say that his actions were because he watched a lot of television and because it would make him look better to his friends, whom he admitted were troublemakers. The response to this in itself was planned, and was partly why David and his buddy only received a slap on the wrist. 5 years, intensive supervision probation. Wasting no time at all,